They taught us this story early. Clean, simple, safe. They said there were 9 crusades. They said they were wars of faith. They said they ended. That is the first lie. Because wars leave graves. But what happened left patterns. Long before dates were written in books, scribes were instructed to stop counting. Not because the wars ended, but because the number became dangerous. 9 sounded complete. 9 sounded holy. 9 sounded finished. 13 sounded like a warning. Ancient records, those that survived fire, censorship, and careful editing, never used the word war. They used another word, scratched into margins, never read aloud. Operations. Not battles. Not campaigns. Operations. Each one precise. Each one timed. Each one requiring blood spilled by people who believed they were chosen. Because belief was the key. A man who fights for gold can flee. A man who fights for land can surrender. But a man who fights for God will die exactly where he is told. And die they did. Not randomly. Not chaotically. They died in corridors. They died in clusters. They died in shapes no historian was supposed to notice. When modern analysts overlay the deaths on maps, something impossible appears. Lines that curve too perfectly, arcs that meet too cleanly, as if the earth itself was being drawn on with bodies. No one was meant to see that. The chronicles say the Crusaders marched east. The ground remembers something else. It remembers placement. It remembers weight. It remembers being fed. The lie we were taught was not just about numbers. It was about purpose. We were told the Crusades were about reclaiming holy land. But no one reclaims land by throwing bodies into it and never returning. No, this was never about taking territory. It was about closing something, or keeping it closed. And that is why 4 crusades were erased. Not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. By the time the counting stopped, the people in charge understood something horrifying. If the truth were known, if anyone realized the crusades were not history, but instructions, then the final stage would begin. And instructions, once understood, must be followed. So they told us there were 9. They told us the story was over. They told us God was watching. What they didn't tell us is that something else was listening, and it is still counting. Fade to silence. No army moves without a voice. In 1095, that voice came from Pope Urban II. History says he gave a sermon. Witnesses said he changed. Those closest to him recorded something disturbing. Midway through the speech, his tone dropped, slow, hollow, unfamiliar. Some swore his mouth kept moving after the words should have ended. The crowd didn't cheer at first. They froze. Then men began to cry. Others fell to their knees, shaking. Many later claimed they didn't decide to go east. They were told. That night, thousands reported the same dream. A command spoken without language. A direction felt, not heard. Do not question. Urban II did not create the crusade. He read it aloud. From where? No manuscript remains. No draft survives. Only one note, written by a monk who later burned himself alive. It spoke through him. And when it finished, it was hungry. By morning, Europe was moving. Not toward glory. Not toward Jerusalem. But toward the first mark on the earth. Low marching fades in. They told us Jerusalem was the goal. The holy city. The promised land. That is the second lie. Because no one fights for a city the way the Crusaders did. They didn't surround it. They didn't negotiate. They didn't claim it and leave. They bled into it. Jerusalem was never a prize. It was a location. A point on the earth chosen long before Christianity, long before Scripture, long before God had a name that humans could pronounce without fear. Ancient fragments describe Jerusalem not as a city, but as a hinge, a place where the ground is thinner, where sound travels downward instead of up. Beneath Jerusalem, the earth is hollow, not empty, listening. The Crusaders did not know this, but whoever sent them did. When the city fell, history celebrates victory. But the ground remembers something else. Blood didn't pool. It disappeared. Eyewitnesses wrote of streets that drank the dead, of bodies that sank into stone as if the city were soft. Some claimed the screams did not echo outward, but downward, drawn into cracks that shouldn't exist. Men were killed where they stood, not chased, not scattered. Plus, later analysis of the slaughter reveals something no holy text explains. The deaths form concentric patterns, spirals centered not on temples or walls, but on a single point beneath the city. A point no one was allowed to dig. Those who tried, Muslims, Christians, scholars, zealots, never returned the same. Some lost their speech. Some clawed at their ears until bone showed. One wrote only this over and over, until his hands rotted. It is not buried. It is anchored. The ancients knew this place. They sealed it with belief, not stone. They discovered that faith, pure, unquestioning, violent faith, pressed downward, like a hand holding a lid shut. That is why Jerusalem changes hands endlessly. Because ownership was never the point. Pressure was. Every crusade, every massacre, every holy war added weight. Bodies were not casualties. They were counterweights. And when the Crusaders finally stood victorious, chanting prayers in streets slick with blood, something deep beneath the city shifted. Not awake, not yet, but aware. The city has never been quiet since. Earthquakes, endless war, prayers spoken in 3 religions, all aimed at the same scar in the ground. Because Jerusalem is not holy. It is holding something down. And the most terrifying truth written in the forbidden margin says this: when the blood no longer comes from soldiers, the city will open. Jerusalem was never the prize. It was the lock. And locks are only useful until the thing inside learns how much pressure it can endure. Low rumble fades into silence. History calls it madness, a mistake, a tragedy born of ignorance. That is the third lie. Because children do not march across continents by accident. They were sent first. Not armed, not trained, not protected, because they were never meant to fight. They were meant to be pure. The records describe thousands of children leaving their homes, some barely able to speak, others still losing baby teeth, walking east as if pulled by something they could not see. Parents begged them to stay. Soldiers tried to stop them. Nothing worked. Witnesses said the children walked calmly, smiling, humming hymns they had never been taught. When asked where they were going, many gave the same answer. We are needed. No banners, no armor, just belief so absolute it bordered on possession. The roads they walked became strange. Animals refused to cross after them. Wells dried overnight. At night, villagers reported hearing 2 sets of footsteps, the children's, and something heavier, pacing beneath the ground. The children were not leading the crusade. They were preparing it. Ancient marginal notes, scratched into church records and later burned, explain why children were chosen. Faith without doubt sinks deeper. Adults question. Adults hesitate. Children accept. When they reached the sea, it opened for them. Not parted, opened. Ships arrived that no one could later identify. No flags. No ports of origin. The captains never gave their names. They only asked one question. How many? The children boarded. They were never seen again. No wreckage. No bodies. No survivors. Just silence so complete that coastal towns reported the water itself going still, as if holding its breath. Years later, crusaders passing through those same regions described something impossible. Bones surfacing far inland, arranged in careful rows, too small to belong to soldiers. Skulls with mouths stretched open, as if singing, or screaming, forever. The truth the church buried was simple and unbearable. The children were not lost. They were accepted. Their deaths were not collateral damage. They were the first offering. Before the armored men arrived. Before the cities burned. Before Jerusalem drank its fill. Because whatever waited beneath the earth did not want warriors first. It wanted something clean. Something unquestioning. Something that would not resist being taken apart. And the final line, found in a ruined monastery and never explained, reads, when the children were consumed, the ground softened. After that, the crusades could begin. Distant childlike humming fades into silence. There were crusades you were never taught. Not because they were small. Not because they failed. But because they happened exactly as intended, between the famous crusades, between the dates historians like to argue over, entire armies marched and vanished. No victories, no treaties, no surviving songs, just silence. These crusades had no names, no enemies, no cities to conquer. They marched into forests, valleys, deserts, places with no strategic value. Chroniclers wrote that scouts reported nothing ahead, yet the commanders ordered the advance anyway. Straightforward, no detours, no retreat. Survivors, very few, described the same terror, the ground becoming soft beneath their boots, as if walking on buried flesh. Horses refused to move. Armor grew unbearably heavy. Some soldiers claimed they felt hands pulling at their legs from below. No battle cries were heard, only screaming. When reinforcements arrived days later, there were no bodies, no blood, no signs of combat, just indentations in the earth, perfectly spaced, perfectly measured, as if thousands of men had been pressed downward at once. Church officials erased these events quickly. Pages were torn out, dates removed, entire campaigns reclassified as logistical movements or false reports. But the earth kept the record. In certain regions, crops still fail. Animals refuse to graze. Locals report hearing metal grinding beneath the soil at night, like armor being dragged slowly through stone. Ancient marginal texts explain what really happened. Not all seals were in Jerusalem. The body is large. It required many bindings. These crusades were not meant to be remembered. They were meant to anchor. Each one sealed a different pressure point. Each one fed the ground with faith-soaked bodies until it stopped shifting. The soldiers thought they were marching toward glory. They were being lowered. And the most disturbing truth? These crusades never officially ended, because the armies were never defeated. They were absorbed. The land they marched into is still heavier than it should be. Still warm in winter. Still breathing if you listen closely enough. History forgot them on purpose. Because if people realized how many times humanity was sent to die without witnesses, they might ask who was giving the orders. And what would happen if those orders were ever finished? They call it God. They call it Christ. They call it justice. But beneath every cross erected over the Crusades, there was another God. Older than Scripture. Older than faith. Older than mercy. It was not worshipped. It was fed. Every soldier who marched east, every blade raised, every life taken in the name of God, it all went to it. Chroniclers recorded miracles. Some say the banners trembled with divine wind. Some say the dead were struck down by unseen hands. But the hidden texts, those that survived fire, reform, and censorship, reveal the truth. The banners trembled because something moved beneath them. The dead fell because it required balance. Faith was its food, doubt its poison, and the most loyal were the most digestible. Soldiers reported strange experiences. The cross above them seemed heavier than stone. Bells tolled on their own, deep and hollow, as if inside the chest of someone dead. Whispered voices spoke in tongues they did not know, yet understood perfectly. Those who lost faith first were consumed. Not by enemies, not by armies, not by fire, by the war god beneath the cross was patient. It did not need armies. It needed obedience. It needed belief. And when belief faltered, it grew. Some scholars tried to interpret the texts. They discovered that every major crusade, every massacre, every battle in God's name was precisely aligned. Not for glory, not for land, but for feeding a God buried beneath symbols of salvation. The crucifix, they realized too late, was not protection. It was a lid. The crosses were not erected to honor divinity. They were restraints. And the more blood spilled under them, the stronger the God became. Because it did not eat flesh or bone. It consumed faith. And when it has had enough, the crosses will fall. The soldiers who died under them thought they were heroes. They were just offerings. And the God waits still, waiting beneath every cross ever raised, waiting beneath the weight of human devotion. And it is hungry. Distant church bells toll slowly, not from a tower, but from beneath the ground. They told us the Crusades ended. History gave them dates, names, victories, losses. But one crusade, one never ended. The 13th. It has no date, no banner, no king, no pope, because it is not a war. It is a ritual that never sleeps. Every killing in God's name, every holy battle, every act of faith, every crusade ever fought since the first, is part of it. Every terror, every slaughter, every drop of belief that tastes of devotion feeds it. And the blood never stops. It moves slowly, like a shadow across centuries. It does not march in armies. It marches in time. It waits in whispers. It waits in orders, in prayers, in contracts, in sermons. It moves where humanity moves, unnoticed. The 13th Crusade is eternal. No one is alive who remembers its beginning. No one is dead who can claim its end. It does not care about victories. It does not care about losers. It only counts the obedient. Every modern war echoes it. Every fanatic killing. Every zealot convinced of righteousness. Every child indoctrinated. Every soldier who believes in a holy cause. They are all soldiers of the 13th. And its final stage will not require armies. It only requires witnesses. Those who learn too much. Those who see patterns. Those who know the truth. Because the 13th Crusade feeds not just on blood. It feeds on knowledge. And if you are hearing this story, if you are reading this account, then you are already part of it. No date marks its beginning. No calendar will mark its end. It is here now. And it is waiting. Low, rhythmic drumming begins, like thousands of unseen feet marching across the earth. They promised heaven. They promised glory. They promised that the brave who died for God would be rewarded. That was the fourth lie. Because there was no reward. Not for the children. Not for the soldiers. Not for the kings who sent them east. Not for the men who marched with crosses in their hands and fire in their hearts. The ancient texts, those burned, buried, or hidden, reveal the horrifying truth. The faithful were never meant to reach heaven. They were fuel. Fuel for something older than mercy. Something hungry. Every life spilled in the name of faith, every drop of blood drawn by command, every scream echoing through stone streets, through mountains, across deserts, through the very soil, all of it was collected. Not to harm them, not to punish them, not to glorify them. To feed it. The war god beneath the cross. The listener beneath the ground. The one they called locked away under Jerusalem. Every crusade, every slaughter, every battle, every victory, every loss, was a course of feeding. The obedient were devoured first. The doubters were fed later. Even those who survived were changed. Chroniclers describe men who returned from battles speaking differently. Their voices had pauses where no one else could hear. Their eyes reflected shadows that were not there. Their hands twitched when no one touched them. Some refused to speak for days, then whispered only one phrase over and over. We were not brave. We were eaten. The reward was a lie. There is no salvation for obedience. There is only the God beneath the earth, beneath the cross, beneath the blood-soaked soil, waiting. And every time someone believes that dying for faith will earn them a place among angels, the God smiles. Because it is hungry still, and it will not stop. It does not care about kings or priests. It does not care about soldiers or saints. It does not care about history. It only cares about the faithful. The last line of the forbidden manuscript, written in a hand that clawed through the parchment like talons, reads, "They marched to heaven, but heaven was already at the table waiting to eat." Sound of distant chanting fades into wet, unearthly whispers, growing louder. The seals are not stone. They are not iron. They are faith, obedience, and silence. For centuries, the 13th Crusade has been bound, held by belief, by ritual, by the careful placement of bodies and prayers. Every act of devotion, every war fought in God's name, every sacrifice, it all strengthened the lid. But no seal lasts forever. And the last one is breaking. You do not hear it. You do not see it. But it notices you. The ancient warnings, burned in manuscripts and whispered in monasteries, are clear. The final witness will feed the mouth. And the mouth hungers for the living. Every story told, every secret discovered, every mind that knows the truth adds weight. The listener beneath Jerusalem, beneath crosses, beneath blood-soaked earth, it is awake enough to reach out now. Some feel it in their dreams, cold hands sliding under skin, whispers counting sins that haven't been committed yet. Some hear it in the static of radios, in the hum of machinery, in the quietest part of the night. The marching of invisible soldiers, endless, patient, precise. The final seal was not broken by war. It was broken by knowledge, by attention, by seeing the pattern. And now, if you are listening, if you are reading, if you have understood even a fragment of this story, you are the witness. The final line of the hidden manuscript, smeared in something dark and sticky, reads, "If you hear this, you are already counted. The 13th Crusade has claimed you. And beneath the ground, beneath the crosses, beneath the cities built on holy lies, something stirs. It does not roar. It does not scream. It waits, patient, infinite. Because the last seal is gone. The feast has begun. Low, wet, dragging sounds rise, and then silence. Until your own heartbeat joins the rhythm.